Hi, Jim Cantelon here. Welcome to JCT. Today you're going to meet Rita Prince. Rita is a young woman who works very diligently with an organization that I know intimately called WOW, Working for Orphans and Widows. We started WOW 16 years ago, my wife and I did, and now it's an amazing organization that's involving some really special people working with orphans and widows in very, very vulnerable situations in mainly Southern Africa, although we are now moving into Northern Uganda as well. Rita is the director of projects and programs, so she's very, very involved, not only in administering, but also monitoring and evaluating what is happening on the ground. So, you know, she's one of these people who is continually in Africa, who is working those fields, if you will, in terms of the least of these, poverty beyond description. And many of you viewers would love to be involved in something like that, but you cannot because of various limitations. Here's someone who's doing it, if you will, on your behalf. She's a fascinating young woman, and you're going to find this interview, I think, not only inspiring, but very educational as well. So after this short break, we will come back with Rita Prince of WOW.
This is a Voice of the Martyrs Canada news update, a special report.
What began with anti-government protests escalated into a full-scale civil war involving the brutal tactics of Islamic State jihadist militants. More than 200,000 Syrians have lost their lives in 4+ years of armed conflict. About a quarter of them were Christians. In spite of all they've had to go through, Karima says their faith in Jesus hasn't wavered.
God is with us wherever we go.
Tens of thousands of Christians have died in the war since 2011. Despite the dangers, the Voice of the Martyrs Canada has been able to help persecuted Christians in Syria, providing food, supplies, Bibles, and prayer.
For more information, visit www.vomcanada.com.
Before I interview Rita Prince from WOW, Working for Orphans and Widows, I want you to take a look at this.
Hi, this is Rita from WOW. It's very noisy here because we are experiencing a really wonderful thing here in Ngwangwa. These people are bringing home half a 25 kg bag of maize, and it's their lifeline. Many have told us one woman coming here said her and her children hadn't eaten for 3 days. Another two old ladies were just dancing to say how happy they are, and they feel like their lives have been saved. I've never seen anything like this. They're all splitting up the bags of maize, and they're all sharing it and taking it home, and it's a very happy feeling here today. I want to just thank everybody that has contributed to this emergency relief program.
So Rita, there you were on location in Malawi, right? Malawi? Yeah. You've been to a number of, situations where people are being fed. This one was especially inspiring. Why?
Well, Jim, it was actually incredibly heartbreaking as well. I had never experienced something as difficult as this. Just before the feeding started, we were talking to the women, and a lot of them were grannies with children at home. And one woman was saying, I had to leave my 3 grandchildren at home crying while I was coming here hoping I would find some food because I hadn't eaten for 3 days. And just how overjoyed the women were to receive, 3 weeks worth of maize was amazing.
3 weeks or 3 days?
No, 3 weeks. They get 3 weeks at a time.
3 weeks at a time. Mm-hmm. And where's the food coming from?
They're buying it from the National Grain Bin Storage in Malawi.
So there is food in the country, but it has to be purchased.
For now, there is food in the country, but the famine that is going to be affecting them the greatest, it will be in October. Right now, what they're dealing with is the difficult rains last year, but this year the rains were probably way worse. So they'll be in a great difficulty October, November.
Now, you often hear about food riots. People are so desperate for food, and a truck with supplies comes in and people start climbing over one another and fighting one another to get to it. Did you see any of that?
Absolutely not. But it's because we have been working in this community for a long time, and people understand how things go and our process. They understand who's in charge, so there wasn't any of that.
You've got things pretty well ordered. So tell us about WOW. I know all about it as the founder of WOW, but most of our viewers know very little about it. WOW stands for Working for Orphans and Widows. You're the projects and programs director. What's the work like?
It's very, very life-satisfying work. It's such an honor to be doing what we do. We see a lot. We see a lot of people who are desperate in every sense of the situation. Desperate spiritually, physically, emotionally. They're just completely broken. And to be able to witness the intervention in their life and how in all areas they are transformed, it's a real privilege to be a part of that.
How do you get involved with a community? Like this community, do you remember the name of it where you were in the video?
That was in Gwangwa, Malawi.
Gwangwa. Okay, so how did WOW get involved there?
Well, it's really through the church. So either people coming out of the church or existing churches in community. And when we always look for champions in a community of people who are already doing something with nothing or something with the very little that they have. That shows initiative and shows long-term sustainability. So from there, we just continue to partner slowly by slowly. We bring in, not only do we bring in food and fresh water and helping with housing, those types of things, but we bring in who the sustainer of life is. And so we talk about the Lord. And in many cases, they know God, but they don't know him deeply. They don't know Jesus as a very personal thing. It was more head knowledge. So.
Right. Now, Malawi is being really affected by this El Nino, this mega El Nino that's creating a drought, right?
Yes.
Malawi is known as one of the poorest, if not the poorest, of all African countries. It must be very, very much in a suffering situation. It must be awful.
It really is. You know, a lot of what we do is home-based care.
Yeah. And
so it's needed now more than ever. There's people suffering where not only do they not have food, but they don't have medicine, literally no medicine in any government-run clinic, hospital, not even at some points just something as small as aspirin. So home-based care is really important because it's volunteers, often from the church, that are going out, visiting people who are dying, helping them to die with dignity, helping them to know they're not alone.
Now, WOW is involved in a small way in bringing some pharmaceuticals into the country, right?
Yes, and in Malawi, it is made a really significant difference. We brought tons of medicine in just the last year, and it's going to hospitals, it's going to clinics, it's going to people that desperately need it. And, you know, it's just basic medicine, but when you're desperate, basic medicine is huge.
And no kidding. Now, you're also working in Zambia. The Zambian situation is different in many ways from Malawi, right?
It's a very different country. Both of them are called the warm heart of Africa. I think that's typically known in Malawi, but Zambia is very much like that. The people are incredibly warm, even though you know they're suffering. It's a wonderful place to be. Malawi, with the corruption that's happening and at different levels, they seem to be in a worse state. But it doesn't really matter where you rank on the human index scale. They're all in need of assistance.
You have a number of schools in Zambia, I understand.
Yes. Yeah.
Tell me give me an example of a school that you've seen, start from scratch and where it's at now.
Well, Jim, I didn't believe it was a school, the first one I saw. It was in a village called Katuba, Zambia. And you could see the sky through the roof. It was just looked to me like long grass on the roof. One was I would have thought it was a storage room. The entire grade 4 class was packed in that little room. It was just in a shambles. So some of the things, the great thing is that this was the school that was run by the community, built by the community, which is why it was in such a difficult state. But the people there knew that education is one of the keys to becoming economically sustainable. And so we have built in proper schools. And when you do that, the government will say, well, we'll send you trained teachers if you have a proper school. So it's a fantastic partnership with the government.
And a proper school is like just a simple cement block building with a metal roof, right?
That's right. 1, 2, 3, 4 classrooms. And in those classrooms, you will have, in one school, we have 1,000 students coming in shifts at one of our schools. But they want it so badly, and there's more kids that could come.
They come in shifts?
Mm-hmm. The rooms are so small, the schools are so small that they just run in shifts.
No kidding. Motivated, huh?
Yes, yeah.
No need for mothers to insist that their kids go to school today.
Well, kids are doing homework by a candlelight if they have it, because they are, like you said, so motivated to learn.
Now, in Zambia, WOW has also started a farm called Rob's Farm. You've been there. Tell us a bit about that.
Part of what we like to do, Jim, is to ensure that our partners on the ground, whether it be an NGO or whoever it is that we're working through, that they also become sustainable and not reliant on the funds of WOW. And so this farm was purchased so that they would be able to provide some sustainability, not only for the NGO there, but also to grow food instead of having to purchase it to be able to give to the schools.
And it's doing well?
It's doing fantastic. Yeah. It's so exciting to be there, and it feels very peaceful. They have this Prophet's Mound, they call it, where everybody goes and prays, and it's really nice.
Really?
Yeah.
So what impact is this having on Rita Prinz? You've been at it for a few years now. You used to be a lab tech, right? You're working in the HIV and AIDS field. How is it impacting you personally?
It's completely changed my worldview, for sure. Growing up in the country and out of a small town, I had no idea that we live in, such a small percentage of the world that is really wealthy compared to the rest of the world. And so it's really changed how you see the world. It's changed the ability to speak out, where before WOW, I would have never done that. I was an incredible introvert, and so this has enabled me to have something to talk about that is worth it.
Yeah, you're out there in front of big crowds, you're doing videos, you're on the show with me today. I mean, you've been transformed.
I have, absolutely.
I'm sure that a lot of people would love to connect with WOW. How do they do it?
Well, there's different ways. We have a 1-800 number, and it's WOW Mission is the easiest way to on the web.
WOWmission.ca?
.com.
WOWmission.com.
Yeah.
Yeah, friends, if you want to hear more about WOW and you're intrigued by something you've heard from Rita today, WOWmission.com. Give it a try. Thanks for Rita coming our way, and I'll be back with more right after this.
Contact us. Jim Cantelon today. P.O. Box 989, Burlington, Ontario. L7R 3Y7. If you're sending a check, make it payable to Jim Cantelon today. Or visit us online at jimcantelontoday.com and click support.
Very few African mothers ever see a doctor or midwife, yet each mother knows how fragile her child's life is. You see, 26,000 children under the age of 5 will die today because they don't have access to medical care. Your gift of $260, just $22 every month, helps stock a mobile clinic and train healthcare workers to care for young mothers and their children during pregnancy and preschool years. Join WOW Mother Care now. Protect the life of a mother and her child.
Yesterday we left Jesus riding into Jerusalem in the kind of truncated version of the triumphal entry that John gives us. The other gospel writers give us much more detail, including what's called the cleansing of the temple, which I would have loved to have seen that. Gentle Jesus, meek and mild, picking up a cat of nine tails and dealing with all of the buyers and sellers and commercial enterprise of the temple business. But John doesn't spend any time with that at all. So we're going to pick it up here in verse 4, or let's try verse 16. Yeah. At first, his disciples did not understand all this. I mean, they're walking along in in what's called the triumphal entry, probably behind Jesus as he's riding, on this humble donkey, wondering what is going on here. What's with all these people and this Hosanna business and Hail King of the Jews stuff? They themselves had been following Jesus for 3 years, and they weren't convinced. Intrigued, but not convinced, not yet. Not believing, really, but hoping. So they didn't understand all this. And John says only, and John is speaking of himself as well here, when he says only after Jesus was glorified did they realize that these things had been written about him and that these things had been done to him. Now, this glorified concept, we're going to read a lot about it here in the next several passages, and I'll refer to it again and again, but I just want to establish it right now because this is the first time we're seeing this. When we talk about the glory of God, first of all, here on this blank page, I'll just write it for you again, transliterated, if you will, from Hebrew into English. The Hebrew word for glory is, and pardon my pronunciation, but it's Shekhinah. You kind of got to speak it from your throat. Shekhinah. And in English, you know, we see it this way, Shekinah. You've probably encountered this. Maybe you've heard your pastor speak on it. Shekinah, referring to the manifest or the revealed glory of God. Well, what we're talking about here is glory that relates to the manifest presence of God in space and time. Although there is reference in Scripture to God's glory, if you will, on the other side. But what it is, it's something that is attributed to those who have been exalted in some measure, given great praise and adoration, and it's a kind of a verbal equivalency to the revealed Shekinah, the revealed glory of God that descends out of heaven onto earth and stuns everyone with its magnificence. This essentially is the theological/cultural nuance to the word glory and glorified. And when it talks about Jesus being glorified, what John is referring to here is after the resurrection, after the appearances of Jesus, post-resurrection, to disciples, sometimes groups of 500 at a time, over the course of 40 days. He then ascends to the Lord in the sight of the inner circle of disciples from the Mount of Olives. And this is seen as Jesus entering his glory. And the mental picture is one of the manifest light and presence of God descending and Jesus ascending, if you will, into that cloud of brightness. And that's his glorification. All right? I may be inadequate in my explanation, but hopefully that helps you a bit. Okay? So it was only after that did they realize that there was something going on here that had humongous implications. All right. Now, let's see here. Why are we having trouble? I'll go back and try again. Oh, there we go. Now, this really gets interesting. Verse 20. Oh, you know what? Let me just go back for a minute. There's something I missed, and that's where we have the mess. Okay. I'll just quote it to you. In verse 19, the Pharisees said one to another, "See, this is getting us nowhere. Look how the whole world has gone after him." Now, there is huge significance to the expression or the term whole world. At one point, Jesus himself had said, "I've been called to the lost sheep of Israel." In the early stages of his ministry, that was his focus. But Jesus knew that there was more to his focus than that. Even though in the initial stages, that's where he focused, he understood that his ministry, his presence, his saving power was to extend to the whole world. John captures that in chapter 3, verse 16, when he says, "Now God so loved the," what? World. Not just a given ethnic group, but the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. It's the Pharisees themselves, the religious leaders, who say the whole world has gone after him. The implications of that? There's Gentiles in the mix. Now, let's think about this for a minute. Gentiles in the mix? How can that be? At this point in time, his whole life and ministry has been, within the locus of basically Jerusalem, Upper Galilee, and fellow Jewish Israelites. That's been it. But what we fail to understand is that Jerusalem and Israel were, if you will, right in the center of trading routes. They were very much a part of a time when the Roman Empire was huge. The Egyptians were powerful. There was access to Mesopotamia, all kinds of, parts of the Mediterranean basin. And so it wasn't just Jews in Israel and Jerusalem, but there were thousands of Gentiles coming through, some staying for a period of time, others just traveling through. But it was a cosmopolitan city. It wasn't just a Jewish city. So Gentiles were being impacted by the life and ministry of Jesus, even though they're very seldom mentioned. Although there are some that he performed miracles on, the Syrophoenician woman, for example, who were not Jewish. But here you have an implication that is profound. Now, that's why verse 20 is so critical. Now, there were some Greeks among those who went up to worship at the festival. Now, the festival is Passover, right? Greeks coming to Passover? What's up with that? You see this in the book of Acts, but there was this reality. There were any number of Greeks, Romans, Macedonians, Alexandrians from northern Africa, who for whatever reason had been struck with the Jewish teaching about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to the point that they had committed their lives to that God, to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and as such became known as God-fearers. That was an actual term that was used to describe them, God-fearers. And even though they weren't Jewish, they were accepted as, if you will, righteous Gentiles by the Jewish synagogues of the day. These Greeks here would be among those who were God-fearing. So they had come up at Passover to worship the Lord. And, the Old Testament prophets had always made a point that Israel show the highest regard for what's known as the sojourner or the refugee or the alien, to the point where the three main focuses or foci of the Old Testament prophetic call was to care for the needs of the orphan, the widow, and the alien or the sojourner, the refugee. So anyway, they're coming up to worship at the festival. And they come to Philip, one of Jesus' inner circle of disciples. Now, why Philip? Well, first of all, Philip was a Greek name. And secondly, as John says, he was from Bethsaida in Galilee. Kathy and I and our kids have been to Bethsaida more than once. It's a fascinating ruins, and it's the only ruins that we've been to that is made completely out of basalt rock. Now, basalt is volcanic, which means it's black. The whole city is made out of black rock. And I'm sure that in its heyday was pretty striking in its appearance. It's right on the northeast coast of the Sea of Galilee, but it was very influenced by the Gentile world, the Greek world, and the Roman world at that time. And Philip was from that town. And it could very well be that these Greeks either knew Philip or knew of him, or he had a certain look, he had a Greek name. They felt comfortable talking to him. And what do they say to him? We would like to see Jesus. This we would see Jesus theme is something that has been drawn to the attention of many congregations over the centuries by pastors and visiting guest preachers as a kind of an ultimate heart's cry. Often maybe not really emphasizing the fact that it came from Gentiles at that point, but this desire to see Jesus, to spend time with him, to encounter him in some kind of a one-on-one dialogue. I think even to this day it's relevant. When you get right down to it, we don't want religion, we want relationship. We don't want to just be conformed to something, we want to be transformed. We know that there is a need for change in our hearts, and intuitively we understand that it is Jesus who can effect that change. And if that's your heart's cry, I would see Jesus, well then he's ready to be seen. God be merciful to me, a sinner. Just invite him into your life. Say, Lord, I'm awash in the mystery. I don't understand all there is to this, but please, if you're there, let me see you. Let my heart resonate with your heart. It's a good prayer. Pray it. Back with more tomorrow.
This is a Voice of the Martyrs Canada news update, a special report.
More than 200,000 Syrians have lost their lives in 4+ years of armed conflict. About a quarter of them were Christians. Prior to the uprising and then the war, there were about 3 million Christians in the country. About half of them have left, and most of the rest want to leave as well.
It breaks my heart to see what is happening to my nation with all the terrorism and the violence among the people.
If you would have come to Syria before, you would have seen how it was full of churches and beautiful Christian places, and now it's all gone. It's all destroyed.
Amani was encouraged by the concern and support of the Voice of the Martyrs Canada, but is pleading with Christians everywhere to continue to pray.
For more information, visit www.vomcanada.com.
You know, I think a key to what Rita Prinz and others are doing with WOW is the commitment WOW has made to working with local churches. There's any number of Made in America or Made in Canada solutions to poverty in general and to meeting the needs of the afflicted in specific areas where poverty is not only endemic but is beyond description. The Made in North America solution in many cases does not work for the long term. What does work for the long term is local people engaged in a local church with local accountability, local responsibility, local recognizability. You put all that together and you have a winning formula. To have a little family of orphans, for instance, ministered to by, the sweet people just down the road there in that little Baptist church, or those Presbyterians, or those Roman Catholics, and I know the pastor's name and the people from his church. Well, that is the road to sustainability. And I think that this is a critical value of what WOW is doing. And when you see a person like Rita Prinz, who is playing such a critical role in just oiling the wheel and catalyzing this activity on the part of local believers, it really gives you hope, and you have a sense that you can trust this organization. If you want to get in touch with WOW, it's wowmission.com. There's an 800 number there on the screen as well, but I'm sure they'd be glad to hear from you. I'm Jim Cantelon. Thanks for watching. See you again next time.
Contact us. Jim Cantelon today. P.O. Box 989, Burlington, Ontario, L7R 3Y7. If you're sending a check, make it payable to Jim Cantelon today. Or visit us online at jimcantelontoday.com and click Support.